You can't hear me if you don't put it in. You can't hear. There you go. Can you hear now, Matt? Matt, can you hear now? Yes? Matt, you there?
Say it again, Mike.
Yeah, you're there. Okay, we can hear you.
I hear you guys. I hear you
Okay,
guys
cool.
perfectly. Yeah.
Okay,
That's
I'm gonna
perfect.
cut the audio for a second just because we're actually live technically.
We're live. We're just on the pre-show, so just so you know.
Don't say anything inappropriate.
You could talk about Wesley and lacrosse. That's looking at you attached to a.
I hear you guys.
Okay, so he's good now, right?
Yeah,
That's
it's
better.
Just if that window's in his background, it's gonna get dark and light constantly.
Yeah, you don't have a. He doesn't have a shade.
Well, let me.
Oh, he's gonna move it.
You just froze.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's much
No,
better.
That won't happen anymore now.
Okay, that's good. The window is killing you.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna start up. Ready, Cor?
Hold on. Matt, can you tilt the camera down a little bit so we can see your logo on your shirt?
Yeah. Right now, I'm kind of holding it, so now I'm gonna manipulate this here
There
for
you
you.
go. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I can go down a little bit on the stand-up desk here. Is that better?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Perfect.
All right, so what we're going to do, Matt, we're going to do our show open. I'm going to say a quick word. Then we got a little, and then we'll get right into it.
Perfect.
Okay. Are you ready, Corey?
Yep.
All right.
All right, how's everyone doing tonight? Well, I guess it's not actually night; it's the daytime. I'm not really used to this, the 2 p.m. start, but we're on Beyond the Game on our new time, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We got a great guest coming on to the show tonight. Someone that today, someone we've known for a long time, part of a company that's growing and developing and ever changing and helping more and more players each and every year. We have our main man, Matt Wheeler, who is one of the co-founders of SportsRecruits, and as we know it, Lacrosse Recruits, because we are a lacrosse company. That's what we do. We talk lacrosse, we help lacrosse players, and that's our world. So before we get into it with Matt, we're gonna cut out for a quick little visual from one of our sponsors, Epic Lacrosse. All right, live on our latest episode of Beyond the Game, we have Matt Wheeler of SportsRecruits. Matt, how you doing, my man? Hey, Matt, can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Do you not hear me?
I can hear you now. How we doing,
Perfect.
my man?
Good. Glad we overcame the technical difficulties here.
Well, a lot of adversity so far today, but we're getting through it.
That's good.
Talk to us a little about where you are right now.
I am in Brooklyn, New York. That's where our headquarters are. We're about a few hundred yards from Barclays here in downtown Brooklyn. And we actually just opened up an office in Denver, Colorado as well. So we got a few people out there. So trying to take care of our West Coast families, just like our East Coast families.
Well, I know. So we wrote a short little preview. One of our interns, Kenneth, did a great job putting that together for having you on the show today. I know you guys have like that, that like kind of like storybook start where you kind of got things going like in the basement. But didn't you guys work out of Colorado for a little bit? Wasn't your offices based out of there?
We did. So after 2 years in the basement in Connecticut and Darien, where I grew up, Chris and I had both lived in New York at some point. So before we started the company, so we kind of got that out of the way. So we figured we'd never been to the West Coast, and we both enjoyed snowboarding, and actually been out to Denver a few times to the Vail tournament. And so we figured it'd be a good place to go. So myself and Chris and one other guy moved out there in 2010. The time was short-lived because we were still really kind of embedded in a lot of events back east. And so we pretty much spent more time back east than we did where we lived. And so we kind of closed the book on that chapter of Sports Recruits, but we're now back. And there's 4 people out there now. So it's been fun to kind of go back out there and see how that city has grown.
So why did you and Chris decide, like, hey, now's a good time to start heading west a little bit? Does it have to do with the growth of your company and other sports? Does it have to do with the growth of lacrosse specifically in different areas around the country? Talk about why you guys are now also based out of Colorado.
Well, we're in every NCAA sport, which I always tell you guys and other folks in the lacrosse space has given us a good perspective on youth sports. So talk about the growth of club lacrosse, for instance. It wasn't around when we were getting recruited, kind of barely around you were getting recruited, Corey, but we're in other sports like volleyball and soccer, and they've been doing club for a long, long time. So we have a pretty geographically diverse membership base across all sports. And so being out west allows us to serve those families in the different time zone a little better. So, if you're a parent that wants some help at 5 o'clock, we want to be able to provide that help. Even if it's, 7 o'clock here in New York City, it's still only 5 o'clock in Denver.
So for people that don't know about Sports Recruits, do you guys want to give a little bit of like the elevator pitch of like, what your company is, what your mission, what are you guys all about? And let's kind of start right there, and then we can move on to a little bit of the statement that you put together and had sent me earlier today, which I think really kind of encapsulates what parents should be kind of looking for and what kids should be looking for as they approach this their own recruiting process. Yeah,
so some of you guys might be watching and thinking Sports Recruits. That kind of reminds me of this company I know called Lacrosse Recruits. Well, we're the same company, so you're in the right place. But we started in lacrosse in 2008, and we did that because that's what Chris and myself knew. We both played at Wesleyan, Go Cardinals, and graduated in 2005. And so when we launched the business originally, we were just in lacrosse for a few years, kind of 2008 to 2011 or so, before we got into volleyball and then started to get into some other sports. But the mission has remained the same all these years, 10 plus years later, and that's to empower student athletes to pursue their dreams. And the recruiting process is as confusing and stressful today as it was 10 years ago. We thought it might have gotten kind of better with passing of time, but if you're a parent and this is your first kid going through the college process and the college recruiting process, there's a lot more resources available to you, thank God, like Sports Recruits, but it's still a very kind of confusing and stressful process. So over that kind of decade of time, we've spent a lot of time and resources building a technology platform that makes the recruiting process easier. It's never going to be easy. There's always going to be ups and downs. And I know Mike and Corey, you've worked with a lot of student athletes yourselves personally, and it's not a exact science, but we try to build features and functionality inside of our platform that make it easier to find that school that's a good fit for you, but also hopefully make it easy as a click or two to get those schools your profile, video, academic information, and sure beats sending VHS tapes in the mail like Chris and I had to do back in the day.
No joke. It
went from VHS to DVDs to YouTube links, but yeah, now it's a few clicks and you have your information in front of your target schools, and then you're on to doing homework or whatever else you have to take care of.
Sure. So in your statement earlier today, you sent me, use words like confusing, use words like rational, right? Making it a rational, realistic process. You talk about doing your research. Can you elaborate on those things as it relates to the recruiting process for student athletes and then also parents?
Yeah, I think before you get into the weeds of kind of how the process actually works, if a parent sees me wearing a SportsRecruits shirt at the supermarket or something like that, or pumping gas, which happens every so often, and there's a decent chance if I'm in Long Island that they're on SportsRecruits already, they'll ask me for a piece of advice. And what I always pass along is approach the process from a perspective of how you think it should work. And when I say that, it's not that my kid should go to Princeton because I feel like that's how it should be, but think of it as, if I want to be seen by a certain school, how should I do that? Well, you should ask that school to look at you. That's if you want to apply for a job and there's a job opening at a company you're looking to work for, you should apply for that job. You shouldn't hope that the hiring manager at that company is going to randomly think of you and come and fill that job opening with you. So I think the recruiting process gets this kind of reputation as being a black box where it's some kind of mystery and you got to crack some code to kind of become in the know. But when you break it down, it's a matter of doing your research. So finding the schools you're interested in, but then also being really realistic. And I think the kind of some of the comments I made in the email I sent you were, if you're realistic and you work hard, you're going to be in great shape. So if you sit down with your high school and your club coach and say, hey, here are the schools I'm interested in, what do you think? And if that high school and or club coach gives you kind of the go ahead and you are diligent about communicating with those schools and providing them video and updating them on your schedule, you're going to be in great shape. If you're unrealistic and you do nothing, so you think you can go to whatever, some ACC school or whatever it may be, and you do nothing and you just wait for that to happen, it's going to be tough sledding unless you're one of those, top of the pyramid kids. And then it's not going to work also if you're unrealistic and you work hard. If you're going after the wrong schools the entire time, you're not going to trick the coach into taking you by just sheer hard work. So I think that the key is, trying to have those hard conversations early on in your process. And it can be as early as freshman year. Just, hey, where do you think I'm trending? Just can you give me an idea? Because my dream is to play at Notre Dame. And, I was 135 pounds in high school, and any coach could have told me I wasn't going to play at Notre Dame. And so I think kind of that kind of realistic approach, but also being willing to put in the work. You have to provide your video to these schools. You have to stay on top of them and give them your schedules and all these sorts of things. So if you can kind of bring that rational, realistic approach to the schools you're talking about, and then put in the work to communicate with them, you're going to be in great shape.
Yeah, and I think I really like how you guys talk. You advise athletes to lean on the people in their network. It could be club, high school coach. It really could be anybody, right? It could be someone at SportsRecruits. It could be an aunt or an uncle who had maybe one of your cousins went through the process. It could be your godfather or godmother guiding you through it because of something that they've learned through someone that went through it. And I think that's really important for people to know and to understand, because if you kind of just look through it in your own lens and you don't get that feedback, and like you said, have those like difficult conversations, a lot of times from the bat you're kind of setting yourself up for maybe unrealistic expectations, and maybe you don't really know necessarily how much work goes into this thing, because while it might seem work, if you develop pretty good habits and kind of have a process to follow, which we'll get into a little bit later in the show, it's not as bad as it seems. It's also not as confusing and overwhelming as it seems, which you stated a little bit earlier, which I really like, because it's not an exact science, but there is a lot of data surrounded around the recruiting process that makes things a lot easier and allows you to manage expectations and achieve hopefully goals maybe a little bit quicker than you might have originally anticipated. So let's dive into a little bit here, Matt. Let's start by saying, if I'm a student athlete, I want to play lacrosse in college, I'm entering high school, where do you kind of start? Give us the 1, 2, 3 to get the ball rolling for maybe our mom or dad or kid who is just now entering this recruiting process.
Well, there's a decent chance your club might have SportsRecruits already. So if so, make sure you touch base with them and they get you on SportsRecruits. If your club doesn't have it, you can come and sign up on your own. But I would say the habit that you want to form early on is to try to make it as easy as possible for college coaches to recruit you. College coaches are human as well, and they'll take the path of least resistance sometimes. So if there's a student athlete who is super organized and it's easy to find their information, for example, I can just Google Matt Wheeler lacrosse and I can get video, grades, everything I need. And then there's another athlete that I Google their name and lacrosse and nothing comes up. Well, you know, I'm gonna have to jump through a million hoops, especially if the athlete is not old enough for me to communicate with directly to get that information. So try to kind of put yourself in the shoes of college coaches as early on in the process as possible and do things that will, again, logically make it easy for the college coach to recruit you, which is make sure your information is readily available to those college coaches.
So in the recruiting process, there's different types of information, right? You mentioned a couple things like your schedule. You've mentioned a couple things like maybe your grades. You mentioned video. Let's dive into video because, in my opinion, that's become one of the most important things for the players that we've helped through the process. For you, why is video important? How important is it? And then if you have any statistics backing up the importance of video based on your experience and what your team does on a day-to-day basis, if you can please share that.
Yeah, so all things equal, you know, we have a few 100,000 athletes on SportsRecruits across all sports, all demographics, all ages, all athletic abilities, all grade levels, and all things equal, if you have video on your profile, you're 11 times as likely to receive a message from a college coach. So again, let's say I live on Main Street in Manhasset or something, and I have a fully completed profile with video on it, and my neighbor has a fully completed profile with no video on it. I'm 11 times more likely to receive an inbound message from a coach than my neighbor is, just because I've taken the time to put some video on my profile. Now, video is, and for those watching, video is 100 times more easy to come by these days than it was, you know, back in the day, or even back when we started the business. You know, when DVDs were being kind of slung around, it was difficult to get your hands on them. Then you had to rip the video off them. I don't need to get into it too much, but now, you know, we obviously do a video at a lot of events, and there's other companies that do video. So you should have no trouble getting your hands on video. Even if you're a freshman, you should have access to video from one of your events or maybe even your high school. So get in the habit of taking video from kind of the different seasons you play. So you play a spring season with your high school team. Even if you're on JV or the 9th grade team, it doesn't matter. You play a summer season kind of on your own, going to showcases, but also with your club. And then depending on your fall sport choice, you might be playing a fall season as well. So if you could develop the habit of building a highlight reel coming out of each of those seasons, not only is it good kind of habit forming behavior, but if you're going to provide coaches with video after again, the fall season of your freshman year, and then after the spring season of your freshman year, then after the summer, the coach can string together and watch those reels all in a row, so they can say, here's what he or she looked like as a freshman in the fall. Here's what he or she looked like as a freshman in the spring. Here's what he or she looked like as a freshman in the summer, and so on. So it's never too early to have that video available, even if it's just for you and your family and grandma and grandpa or whatever. You don't need to make it such a recruiting, all about recruiting. So just getting in the habit of making that video, because we get calls every single day from parents that are deep into junior year that are now freaking out about video because a coach finally asked for it and they don't have it. Mm-hmm. Don't make them ask for it. Just have it. Just have it on your profile, have it readily available. Don't make the college coach jump through hoops to get it.
And a lot of times in our experience dealing with athletes, a lot of them, they have that video, either it's like sitting in their downloads folder, it's on their computer, it's sitting on their SportsRecruits profile. It's just a matter of now watching it, figuring out what makes you stand out, and creating that highlight reel, which is which is really, it's become so much easier to kind of create that. I know, for example, with SportsRecruits, like, you've developed a functionality where kids can make their own highlight reels through their profiles, which is incredible. To think that you guys, if you told me that 3 years ago, like, hey, like, we're going to have this in the next 3 years, I'd be like, yeah, you're like a decade ahead of time. There's no way. And now it couldn't
Yeah.
be easier, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's if you have a SportsRecruits account and you log in and you go to the video section, there's a decent chance there's some video there sitting there already, ready to be edited. And we launched an editor that was built totally in house, using essentially a decade of knowledge that we've accumulated just being in this space for such a long time. And yeah, it really couldn't be easier versus when, again, back when you were giving a DVD, you had to like the term was rip the video off the DVD, then make it the whole thing. So yeah, it really couldn't be easier. And does it take time? Yes, but again, you're trying to get yourself into a school that's gonna kind of hopefully launch you into the next 40 years of your life. So find the hour here, hour there to do the work, because you're not going to obviously get a second chance to do it.
So Matt, a couple questions are coming in. I'm going to start with our first one from Kaylin. She said, from your perspective, this is a question of developing trust and authenticity for your brand in SportsRecruits. How have you shown you're a trustworthy, reliable source for recruiting as opposed to more traditional in-person methods? And in your opinion, do you think that eventually recruiting will translate to being 100% on technology?
It's a good question. We think, obviously, like macro trends these days, if you want to think of it that way, is technology is penetrating every corner of your life right now. Whether it's how you handle your finances, whether it's how you pay back your friend for pizza or whatever, you're using technology in every corner of your life. And so we obviously firmly believe, why is it not kind of deeply integrated into your college search and recruiting process? And so when you think of kind of a standard in-person experience, let's pretend you decided you don't want to use any technology. You're just going to kind of live the in-person dream. So you play for your high school team, you play for your club team, you go to some showcases. So what you're limiting yourself to from a recruiting standpoint is you're limiting yourself to evaluation just when you're on site at an event. So let's take a medium-sized tournament. If it's on the girls' side, I mean, we're talking 20, 30, 40 fields. So you're hoping that the right school is going to be on the right sideline when you make that good play. Maybe it'll happen, but it's going to be tough. Take a camp or a showcase. You go to Camp A. There's a bunch of different camps and showcase going that weekend. The dream school of you and your family is going to be at Camp B. You're at Camp A. Well, you still need a way to get in front of Camp B. So we've always positioned SportsRecruits as a way to, one, hopefully build stronger relationships with the coaches that maybe the process is already rolling with. But two, and possibly even more exciting, is extend the reach of those games. So you might have played great at some camp or showcase or some tournament, and you have the film from that, and the University of Denver coach wasn't able to make it to that event. Well, great. You can send that video to that coach. And with the quality of video these days, the experience is going to be as good or maybe better than sitting on that sideline, because they can rewind it. Oh, wow, look, let me see that footwork, rewind. Okay, wow, we need to make sure we see this player play live. And so we never look at it as an either or thing. And the on-site in-person evaluation is always going to be a part of the recruiting process. But if the college coach can be more efficient with his or her time at an event, that's where we think the kind of online presence really helps. Is if you're playing on field 33 on Saturday at 4 p.m. and you want that coach to be on your sideline, you can use our product or other piece of technology to hopefully get that coach to your sideline. But what's not going to happen is that coach isn't going to magically show up at 4 o'clock on field 33 to recruit this stud goalie from Connecticut. You need to get them there. And so if you can use technology to get them there, well, that's great. You've now dramatically increased how valuable that on-site experience has been for you, because the school you really want to be seen by is watching you.
Yeah, I also think, to your point, you talk about like the on-site, you talk about the event experiences where coaches can come watch you play. I mean, if you look at a whole calendar year, you're talking about, I know at least for us, if you want to just look at club sports as a way to get recruited on the field, we go to 2, possibly 3 tournaments in the fall. Some players don't even attend those because they're playing a fall sport. So some players don't even get any exposure on the field in the fall. Maybe you go to 1 showcase. Let's say SportsRecruits is running something in the winter, and maybe you go to a prospect day or 2 at a college in the wintertime. That's another 2 or 3 opportunities. The spring, you're playing with your high school team. Most coaches don't recruit at all unless they're going to a high school that's right near where their college is, or if they're going to the playoffs, which is usually a very short window. And if your team's not very good, you may not be in the playoffs. And then the summertime, you're talking about maybe an event or 2, like a camp or a showcase, and then playing with your club team on 4 or 5 occasions. So throughout the entire year, you're talking about, at the most, 15 to 20 opportunities. Now, you take a video of you playing great at multiple events, or even at just 1 event, and you could repurpose that on a daily basis. A coach can watch it anytime, any place, on their phone, on their laptop. They can watch it multiple times. And you're getting your name out there along with other pieces of information that maybe they didn't have when they were at the event watching you play. It's kind of like a commonsensical approach, right, when you go about it that way. Do you kind of see parents, the light bulb kind of flip on when you kind of explain how the SportsRecruits platform works and how your process works?
Yeah, and I think that a tough thing is the events piece is misunderstood a lot of times, and I don't know if that's because maybe the club is saying that this event is or I'm taking you to the best events. Don't worry about anything else, and so they kind of just say, all right, well, it sounds like you got it under control. We're going to the best event, so why do I need to do anything else? Like, I paid this money for this club. I'm going to this event. And so I think once the light bulb goes off for us when we just say, hey, well, how many fields are there going at once? Well, it's a big tournament. It's about 40 fields. Like, okay, well, there's only 100 Division I, women's programs, for instance. There's only 60 on the men's side, or 65 on the men's side. So let's just say they're evenly distributed across every field. We're talking there's 1 or 2 coaches at every field, and that's if every single school is represented. And kind of they start to realize, wow, yeah, I need to make sure that the schools I like know about me, so they make a point to come see me. And then when kind of the parent realizes, wow, there's also going to be like 4,000 kids at this event. Like, I need to make sure my son or daughter stands out. Then it kind of I think the light bulb kind of goes off for them traditionally. Just as we get great when a kid commits, and we've seen this a ton of times where a family will commit, in the process you kind of, we're done with that. And then they're going to an event as a senior, and they find themselves sitting down at their computer or taking out their phone or iPad to start sending coaches their schedule. And they realize, oh wait, I'm committed. I don't need to do that anymore. So if you get it kind of into the kind of process of going to an event, it just becomes second nature. And I think the best part then is, and Mike, you and Corey have seen this, like, you can kind of watch a game at a recruiting event, and you can watch the kids kind of look and see who's on the sideline when they should be focusing on this game that they're playing, right? They've driven across the country or flown or whatever to play in this event. It's hot, it's cold, whatever the situation. They should be either, quote, hopefully having fun, but also competing. And they find themselves looking over to see who's there. Where if you put in the work and you gave the schools your video, gave the schools your grades, it's in God's hands, if you will. Just play. Like, the coaches that are there, or the coaches that are there, you looking over isn't going to help your dream school walk up. So I think it's one of those things too, where if you've prepared for a test and you sit down and you take that test, you've prepared for it. So you're going to perform how you perform. You did the work. If you didn't prepare for the test and you sit down, you kind of start to freak out a little bit because you didn't prepare for the test. You sit down and you don't really know the questions that are coming because you didn't really prepare for the test. And you're probably not going to do as well as the student athlete or student that prepared for the test. So there's a lot of comps between the recruiting process and just, general, again, common sense, like we kind of talked about in our email thread today.
So we've talked a lot about so far video and just being proactive and sending out what we call our recruiting profile to college coaches. Now, I think what some parents may not understand just yet, or what they might be curious about, is like, what does a complete recruiting profile for my son or daughter look like? Can you kind of take us through before maybe an athlete starts like firing out all these emails to college coaches, like what should their profile look like? And if you want to compare it to maybe a Facebook profile for what a parent might understand, or even like a LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, so there's what we kind of call essential information, and then there's, maybe nice to haves, but tens of thousands of coaches every week are actually searching the SportsRecruits database for athletes that fit their needs, and our search functionality for coaches defaults to showing athletes with video first. So if you don't have video, well, it's not going to be a great experience for a college coach. So we're not going to show your profile above another athlete that does have video. So we'll start with video, just making sure you have video. The next thing is your class year. Again, this should all be very obvious stuff, but if you're a coach, you fill recruiting classes by grade. So some coaches right now are filling their 2021 class. Some are still filling their 2020 class. Some maybe feel like their 2020 is in a good place and they're moving to 2022. So making sure your class year is completed, at least on SportsRecruits. And then the next is GPA. And again, it sounds crazy, but if your GPA is a certain number as a freshman, the coaches are very good at kind of projecting where you might end up. And so kind of making sure you have those three things filled out. Because think of it this way, if you're Coach Rabe at Wesleyan and he's looking for looking at 2021, just wants to make sure that he's seen every kid with the grades to get into his school. He's going to start with the class year, and then he's going to make sure the GPA is there, because he knows that he can't recruit athletes that have below a certain GPA. He might layer in SATs and ACT scores as well as those athletes get deeper in their process and have those scores. But an easy way to think of it is, again, if you have it, put it there. If you have SAT scores or ACT scores, those are your scores. Because let's just say you have a 4.0 and some great school reaches out to you and says, hey, Matt, what are your SAT scores? And you say, oh, well, they're whatever they are. It's not going to necessarily scare the coach away that you have those scores, because those scores are the scores you have at that point. Mm-hmm. At least gives that coach maybe, okay, wow, the GPA is where I need it to be. I like the kid athletically, but we need to work on his SATs. And then the coach can communicate with you, hey, Matt, I need your SATs to get to here, or ACTs mm-hmm. to get to here. But if you have information, kind of a general rule of thumb is to put it out there, just because, again, going back to what we started the kind of a discussion with, try to make it as easy as possible to be recruited. And the easier you make it for the college coach, the college coaching community, the more luck you're going to create for yourself. A coach may look at a kid and say, wow, this kid's great. Maybe the grades don't work for my school, but my good buddy coaches at a school kind of one rung below me. We just maybe coached together in the previous season. And then, the coaching carousel goes round and round and round. And maybe, they send the link over to their buddy at a school, down the road that, isn't as academically selective or whatever it may be. So you create a lot of luck for yourself just by being kind of organized and treating the process in a kind of a logical way, like we talked about.
So my profile is complete. I got video. I got my GPA, grad year, upcoming schedule. I got all this great stuff, and I have what I feel as though is kind of a complete profile. I want to start sending it out to some college coaches. I guess the question is talk a little bit about how to target specific schools. Maybe talk about it through your platform and how some families can sit down and go through this process, and then maybe if you can kind of dive in a little bit on what your process is like as kids kind of use your platform and go through it, because I think when to be proactive and when not to be proactive is something that we really try to educate our families on, because sending emails all day, every day is not always the best solution. I feel like sometimes it could be perceived the wrong way. You could be reaching out to coaches when they're not really looking or have the time to think that much about recruiting. So I think that could be a turnoff. So if you can kind of talk about, when it's time to turn it up in the lacrosse world, in your experience, that'd be great too.
Yeah, so you have your profile complete. Everything's going to start and stop there. If your profile is not complete, you obviously shouldn't be sending it to coaches anyway. So what schools you're talking about don't really matter, because your profile is not complete. So assuming your profile is complete, the next step is kind of the research phase. And what's funny is the research phase for a student athlete has started a long time ago when you might have started watching lacrosse on TV. For us back when we only were, and this is crazy to think about, but it wasn't that long ago where the only lacrosse you got on TV was Memorial Day. So there were a lot of kids that were really excited about the schools that would play Memorial Day because that's all they saw on TV. Now, fortunately, there's so much lacrosse and we're exposed to all sorts of divisions and different schools that, hopefully the schools that kids like are a little more kind of widely distributed. But the next step is we have a great school search feature on the platform. The FLG athletes use it pretty prolifically. And what it allows you to do is search by distance from home, size, academic selectivity, down to a major. So if you want to be a nursing major, obviously you want to be targeting schools that offer that major. So put some time into thinking about that list. And that's, I think, a family exercise. So again, if we were doing this as high school aged Matt and I was doing this as a sophomore, I realistically did not know that many schools. I certainly did not know about Wesleyan. I can tell you that for sure. So by bringing the parents into the fold, it might help the student athlete kind of expand their horizons a little bit outside of, again, maybe just the Dukes and the Syracuses that you see on TV come most Memorial Days. So building that list, and even if it's just a first pass, try to start with 20 or so schools. Again, I'm talking even if you're a freshman, just starting with that list of schools. And then if you can get some time on the calendar of your high school coach and or your club, whatever, probably your club is going to be maybe more involved in your process these days, and just ask them to look at these schools and just say, hey, what do you think? And it's totally fine for that list to span from D3 all the way to D1. You might have a school like Wesleyan on there, God forbid, all the way to defending national champion D1 program. So don't be shy about putting schools on there that might seem like a stretch because why not? Does it cost anything to dream? And then ask your high school or club coach to kind of honestly assess that list. And ideally what happens is you come out of that meeting, and this is actually a feature on the site that, again, you guys use pretty well at FLG, is you can categorize that list by reach, fit, and safety. So leaving that meeting, hopefully there's no lost in translation where you're leaving and on your phone, you're looking and you have your schools and they're organized by reach, fit, and safety. So there shouldn't be any, a year from now, well, I thought you said that Duke was a fit. And no, it's a reach. We categorize it as such. So, but I don't want to minimize the importance of that meeting, because traditionally it's a lot easier to skip that part of the process and just start coming out kind of guns a-blazing, just sending all those schools messages. Hey, I want to come to your school. Hey, I've been a big Duke fan forever. I went to your camp when I was younger, et cetera, et cetera. It's really easy to skip that process, that really important step in the process. But I can't stress how much money you're going to save yourself, how much time and hardship and heartache you're going to save yourself just by having that meeting early on in your process. Because I've seen this story literally a million times. It comes junior year and the student athlete finally says, hey, Corey, what's going on here? I'm putting in all the work. I've sent 500 messages. And they say, well, let's look at the schools you've been contacting. And, your club, your high school coach gets one good look at him and goes, well, I've isolated the problem here. You're going after the wrong schools. And you've been doing that for 18 months. And you might've gone to 8 prospect days that involved airplane rides and hotels, and you're starting from scratch. And that's the worst place you can be in, because over that time you could have generated or developed and generated some really meaningful relationships with the right schools for you. And so again, and unfortunately I can say that a million times and people are still going to skip that step. But if we can get a few listeners today that don't skip that step and have that meeting early on in their process, I think they'll thank us for it. Again, going into that kind of heading from your sophomore into your junior year, you would have been realistic all the way. And so, God forbid the process might be fun for you because you're going after the right schools.
Yeah, at least in our experience, people might feel as though those conversations can be difficult ones because, anytime you manage expectations, people are a little worried about like bursting that bubble of, someone's like Division I dream or whatever it may be. But one thing that we've learned is when we sit down with the athlete, and we always have at least one parent there, if not both, to talk about their process, and we try to do it earlier rather than later. Sometimes there is a too early. Sometimes when you meet with an athlete before they should really be thinking in depth about these things, it could be a little bit of a detriment. Sometimes kids just aren't ready to have those conversations. The things that we try to talk about are they're concepts that are a little more for players that are developed and what they want out of their college experience. Some kids aren't even ready to think about college, which is fine. But one thing we notice is those are really productive, positive conversations. A lot of times kids leave saying like feeling a little bit rejuvenated and refreshed and motivated to do well in different areas that don't really have to do with lacrosse. I feel like the motivation that comes from developing and becoming a better lacrosse player is what comes from when the kids are on the field with us and are at practice with our coaches. And I think the off-field stuff comes from sometimes those meetings. And a lot of times, instead of bursting bubbles, we find areas that these kids are doing really well in, whether it be in school or at a club, or sometimes we talk about on-field things as it relates to lacrosse and other sports that they're in, and then they go out and they get after it, and they feel confident in knowing that like the fact that they're spending so much time playing another sport during a season is okay, or the fact that they're not doing great or as well as they want to in the classroom, but they've been getting slowly better. Like that ends up being a really positive thing, and then as we start to target specific schools that maybe aren't schools they've ever even heard of or thought would be in the mix for what they should be looking at, it's a pretty positive thing because, like you said, to target a bunch of schools and not get any feedback is it kind of hurts your confidence. And that's why it's important to target the right schools, because whether it's a school that's not a great fit for you and you've never heard of, but getting engagement from them and getting a conversation with a coach and just getting that ball rolling has been so advantageous for our players, just from a maturity standpoint, from learning to deal with adults, and just learning how to communicate with coaches and college students sometimes when they go make their visits through their process. So that's just, in my opinion and my experience, what we've seen. For you, maybe if you can tell us a little bit more about the numbers, like what have you seen from players that have been super proactive, targeting the right schools at the right times, and how does that help them? Like, what are you noticing from just looking at the data?
Well, like a number that
You're back.
I lost you for a second, but you're back. Yeah. A number that I like a lot is the average number of schools that an athlete has favorited throughout his or her process that logs a commitment on our platform, which is in the tens of thousands at this point. The average number is 27. So again, if you're talking about stacking the deck in your favor and doing your research, and you want to say, well, I want to at least do more than the average because I think I'm extraordinary, I don't think I'm average. So if the average number of favorited schools throughout a process is 27, I'm going to do 40, or pick whatever number you want. But if you pick under the average, then you kind of better hope you're an extraordinary talent, if that makes sense. I'm not saying you're not, but again, if you're trying to just, I want to, here's the average, I want to do above the average. So kind of when we look at that number, what it tells me or what it tells us at SportsRecruits is that the importance of research in your process. And the schools list, your list that we talk about, is a living, breathing thing. It's not, you're not going to do it once and be done with it, because like you kind of mentioned, schools are going to come out of the woodwork when you're a sophomore that you've never even heard of, and that's fine, because I can guarantee you, if you looked at the top 50 schools in the country, just Google top 50 schools in the country, and start from the top and work your way towards the bottom. Pretty quickly, you're going to run into schools you've never heard of. You're going to run into Swarthmore or Haverford or these fantastic schools, Wesleyan, that you've never heard of. And just because you haven't heard of it now doesn't mean it's not going to be the perfect fit for you later. So I think keeping that open mind and continually kind of looking for those opportunities, but then also harnessing our platform. So if you think that you're interested in small, academically selective Division III schools, run that search and see what schools are missing, or whatever big Division I, in urban areas, run that search and see what you're missing, because you'll 100% be missing schools. So if you find a characteristic of a school that you think you like, you've been to enough visits, or you've been on enough campuses where you say, I really like this kind of small Division III experience. Well, run that search and just make sure you've checked all your boxes, because again, Wesleyan was not a school I'd ever heard of, and it's an hour away from me. So that wasn't because I was necessarily uneducated, just because I didn't know any better. I was a 15 or 16-year-old kid, just like some of the people watching. So kind of keep an open mind to those different schools out there that you've never heard of, because Corey and Mike, you guys can probably back me up. If you look at your graduating class every year and you put all the schools they're going to, I would assume the majority of the kids are going to schools that freshman year they never heard of.
Yeah, that's
year in, year out.
Yeah, year to year out. It's usually the case. It's usually also a school that maybe wasn't their dream school off the bat. Maybe they've heard of the school. Maybe like, at some point they knew someone that went there, or, had saw their basketball team play on television, but, it wasn't in the original mix. And it isn't until they start discovering like how conferences are aligned and like what they want out of college, how far they want to be, all the little details that go into asking the right questions, do they kind of find that right place. So I couldn't agree more. A question that just came in, which I actually think it's a really good one, because a lot of times parents don't know how involved or if they should be involved, or what's crossing the line, what's not, just raising kids in general. Like, I feel like those are questions they have to ask, but as it relates to recruiting, it's kind of the same thing. Like, what's an example of like a helicopter parent where it's like, whoa, like you're kind of like doing things you shouldn't be doing. And then what's an example of, how a parent should kind of like, within reason, be involved to help their son or daughter create opportunities in this recruiting process?
Right. So obviously every student athlete is going to be a little different. We even see differences in kind of parent involvement from gender. Student athletes on the female side traditionally might be a little more independent, or so we've seen, or when we do surveys have been told. But I think the piece that you really want the student athlete to try to own, and college coaches might not get enough credit here, but they can tell when an email comes in at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday that that's not Matt sending that message, because Matt's in school and his phone might be locked down depending on what school you go to. So try to have the student athlete own that communication piece. Again, even if it means whatever, carving out that 30 minutes, especially during kind of those times heading into event season or whatever, because you talked about kind of developing some of those real world skills. It's a good learned skill to write kind of complete sentences, young man or young woman to adult. And so, hopefully parents kind of obviously they can look over their shoulder and proofread and make sure that, proper punctuation, spelling is being used, but ideally the parents, stay out of that and kind of take a more supporting role there. The big one in specifically lacrosse, due to the kind of lack of scholarship money compared to maybe some other sports, is financial piece of schools. If you're looking at a Division III school, some of them are over $70,000 a year now. So, the parent will probably have to get involved there, especially when it comes to, submitting different paperwork to schools to see what kind of financial aid package might be able to put together. But, somewhere along the line, that discussion will have to happen, just so that, student athlete and family is on the same page. But I would be careful about ruling out schools just because of the sticker price, because you never know, once you submit your documents and your financials, you never know what might come back in the form of a aid package. So that's something that a lot of parents are kind of uneducated about a little bit as well. We have some good resources on SportsRecruits about that. But I would say the kind of financial piece there, but also, again, the building of that target list, should be a bit of a team effort, just because, again, the student athlete doesn't have those kind of broad life experiences where they might be thinking this school or bust, where the parent might be thinking more, well, what school is going to set you up for a good job right at a school, and then kind of, to the next step of your life and building a family and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, one thing I really like about your website we use all the time is just like the college search piece. I know it's gotten more sophisticated over the years as you guys have gotten the rights to share information publicly, such as like, financial aid info, what type of standardized test scores are traditionally accepted at the schools, as well as GPAs. But one thing I would really like to see on the site, and I'm sure this is things that you can research offline that we look at all the time, is like the return you get on the investment that you make at specific schools. Because I see rankings coming out all the time on like, oh yeah, this school is $75,000 a year, but the kids that go there are getting jobs that that they're making a salary that's double that, in their first year. And I think that's really important, at least for us, as kids start to think about college, as the price goes up and up each and every year, is like, what are kids getting out of their experience, for one? And that comes with playing on the lacrosse team usually, but also, the social piece that just makes it a right fit for the kid. And then, once they graduate, like what's going to happen next? Because if you don't even think about that or start to talk about it early on, even if you don't know what to do or what you want to do as a career, then I think it's a disservice as you guide any athlete through the process, because just going to a school for the brand itself is not necessarily the right reasons. I think the brand is just part of the reason that you should want to go to a school, in our opinion. And there's a lot that goes into the building of a brand of a college, some of which is, I think, important and a little bit more, has a little more substance there, and then others are a little more, I think, superficial. But as we look at the things that are most important, I think the return you get on investment is a big one.
Yeah, and the tough thing there too is that, and if you want to, again, in the interest of trying to be as educated as possible about these things, if you have a school you're interested in, and you wonder, I really want to play 4 years, go look at the roster and see how many seniors there are and see how many freshmen there are, and do some math. And if there's 10 freshmen on the team or 15 freshmen on the team and there's 4 seniors, there's 11 or so missing people that somewhere along the way didn't make it to senior year. So, I loved playing 4 years in college, and I take pride in the fact that I stuck with it for 4 years. And, but it's hard, once you get to school, there's a lot of different distractions, and you layer on the academics and the time commitment that college athlete is. And so, again, not to harp on that research piece, but there's a lot of transfer activity these days, and it's for a number of reasons, but a lot of it is because the school wasn't a good fit from the jump. And so, if you can do that research and front load your process so that hopefully you're going after, the 20 schools that are going to be a good fit for you for 4 years, hopefully that ROI piece kind of takes care of itself, because you've kind of checked all the boxes that this is a good fit for you, with or without lacrosse.
You gave some really good stats earlier on athletes who have video versus ones that don't. Are there any other stats that maybe you and your team have been talking about in the office as it relates to the recruiting process that are worth sharing with everyone today?
Yeah, so we like to harp on the video one, just because what's fun there is that you can just do the work and put it up there and then kick your feet back and go about your business, and you're going to get traction. You're going to get some action on the site. And so that's kind of the best, the best thing, because you're not doing any work. And in this day and age, everyone loves kind of some instant gratification or some return for no work. And so we always like to harp on that one. And then, again, the number of messages you send, pretty much correlates almost in line with the number of schools that you express interest in on the platform. So we don't really dig in too much to how many messages get sent to those schools, because a lot of times, as your process unfolds and you go deeper and deeper into it, you'll take the conversation more kind of offline to text messages or just phone calls and stuff like that. So we don't get as much insight into that as we do early on in the process. But if you can, kind of do that research and, get to that, you've identified and communicated with 20 plus schools, 27 plus schools, if you want to be kind of right on the nose average, you're going to be in really good shape if you can take care of those two things. So, doing your research and really kind of leaning into video. And we see kids go crazy with it. And some kids, it's fun for them, right? They're making themselves little highlight reels and sharing it across. It's more, it can be social as well. It doesn't have to just be recruiting stuff. But if you can take care of those two things, you'll be in pretty good shape.
So, Matt, I wanted to ask you a question about how the coaches of the young men or young women use your platform. Can you explain how a recruitable athlete can utilize sports recruits and communicate with college coaches through their club or high school coaches?
Right. So there's kind of I guess three sides of the SportsRecruits platform. There's obviously the student athlete and family side using the product, and you can go sign up for that right now for free and build your profile and start playing around with it there. There's the college coach side. So college coaches every day are logging in and running searches for athletes that fit the criteria of their school. And you probably heard this a million times, but you'd be hopefully not surprised to know that if you're the Princeton lacrosse coach, you have somewhat rigid academic requirements to get a kid into school. And if you're, again, Wesleyan or any school, they all have their kind of requirements they need. And so coaches will run searches for athletes that fit those needs. So obviously, let's say you're a 4.0 athlete and you don't have your grades on your profile, you're not going to show up in that search. So again, make sure that information's there so you show up. So the coaches use it that way, more outbound looking, but then inbound as well. So an athlete can communicate with any school with a built-in meshing system on the site. So every school in the country, every coach in the country is on the platform. So they can pull up Wesleyan, click send a message, say, hey, coach, congratulations on the national championship 2 years ago. And I'm interested in playing at Wesleyan. Here's my profile and my grades and everything, and click send, and the coaches all get that at Wesleyan. So they can click on your profile and get some of the information they need. And then the third kind of side of it is the side that clubs like FLG and others kind of all across the country, across every NCAA sport use, and what Mike and Corey can do and other club staff can do if they have the platform kind of built into their club is they kind of have a bird's eye view of what student athletes are up to. So they can see that. Maybe I messaged Wesleyan and they can kind of jot a quick note off and send it to Coach Reba and say that, Matt's a good kid. So that side of the platform really was built, again, kind of going back to the beginning of the discussion, that was built learning from volleyball. And, we had volleyball athletes tell us, this is back in 2011, 12, 13, that I wish my club could be brought into the fold here because I'm having so much success on the platform, but I want my club to ride shotgun with me. And so that's why we built the club platform, and it's worked very nicely in lacrosse as club, the kind of scale and importance of club has grown in lacrosse because, again, 10 short years ago, there were only a handful of clubs. So that side of it is really, that club side of it is more, so hopefully the club staffer and the family can stay on the same page and work together to find that fit, as opposed to, the student athlete's off doing his or her thing. And then, they're meeting with the club one time a year, and then there's not much discussion or follow up between. And so the idea there with the platform is that both sides can stay in constant communication, and there's no kind of he said, she said, lost in communication stuff, because the club can see exactly what I've been up to and who I've been communicating with and who's looking at my profile, and hopefully can keep everyone on the same page and hopefully work with that athlete to find a good fit.
Yeah, I think in my experience, like the organization piece is big that you just mentioned, but I think the accountability piece is even bigger because, when we sit down and have those meetings, there's usually an action item that goes along with it. All right, you got to make your video. All right, you got to tag, you got to favorite, a bunch of schools. Hey, you got to send messages out. And then the next, it could be a week later, it could be 2 weeks later, that follow-up, the only way I can kind of hold that athlete accountable is kind of like see what they've done on their profile and see what their activity has been like. Because, with all due respect to, the middle, the high school kids that are going through this process, I'm not just going to take their word for it that they did what I asked of them. It's like, it takes persistence, it takes diligence, it takes consistent follow-up in order to sometimes get get out there what you're trying to get out there to the right schools. And, we need to make sure our kids understand that in order to look over their shoulder and make sure they're doing what we ask of them. We need something that can keep everything together in one place, one platform where we can kind of not just manage expectations, but help kids, follow up and do all the things that are essential in order to give them more opportunities in their process. So that's one thing I love it. I'm going to be speaking to an athlete's dad later this afternoon to talk about his process. And, I'm going to be looking at his profile before I call the dad, because I want to know like what he's been doing. I want to know what messages he's sent, and I want to know that his process hasn't been strictly offline, because again, that's not enough. It can work. It has worked. That old school process of like talking to a coach, having you be seen at the event, that one school you end up going to, and that's a school that you always wanted to go to. Like that does happen, but it's just not the safest or smartest option. So that's why we don't want kids to be in a habit of just doing that, because it's really not enough these days, especially as more and more kids are starting to play high school lacrosse and want to play in college. So a question actually just came. Oh, sorry, Matt. Yeah.
Can I talk about that? Like talk about that meeting that you just talked about, and let's like role play that. This is the student athlete's turf right here. This is their turf. On their phone is their turf. If you're not playing on their turf, they're not going to be playing the same game as you. So if you say, hey, Matt, I need you to go research 20 schools and come to me with a list, they're going to leave that meeting and they're going to say, well, where am I supposed to get a book? How does Corey want me to do this? Like, how am I going to communicate back to Corey? And so there's all these decisions that have to be made before the student athlete even does any research. And so by kind of having this, program, or having the platform kind of on the turf where they play, I think it breaks down a lot of barriers for that student athlete to complete those really important tasks you give them. Because if you just give them some homework on a kind of a sheet of paper, hey, I need you to favorite 20 schools and message them. Well, I might use, I don't know, program A, my teammate might use program B. Then it leaves you in a position of trying to keep both people accountable, but they're not doing it in the same place. And so it's almost nearly an impossible task for you as the club director to keep that athlete accountable. Not to mention, is it going to be tough for the student athlete as they have to go look for the, Coach Reba's email address on the Wesleyan student directory. And after he does 4 of them, he says, the hell with this. I got other things I got to do. So we like to think that it just, not only does it make it easier for the student athletes, but it allows you to, work with them in a place where they're comfortable, which is their phone these days.
Mm-hmm. 100%. I've gone from, just talking to parents, having conversations, and meetings, to now, just texting on a weekly basis with athletes, because that's their turf, that's what they know, that's what they're comfortable with, and that's the best way to get through to them. And and it works. So right now that's the form, and that's what we use. And I totally agree. I think that's great advice for club directors and high school coaches to understand how kids are communicating and find that's the path of least resistance. Now, with that being said, it's like athletes still need to understand they're going to have to come out of their comfort zone at some point, and that's something we try to prepare them for too. Like having, when you go from like having the online experience to the offline experience, which is usually a little bit later in the process, as athletes can talk to college coaches, it's like, hey, that's coming too, so how can we prepare you for that? We've had mock phone calls, we've had athletes come and sit down with us. That's always gets them a little more comfortable. And we have, we ask the athlete questions directly, and if the parent tries to jump in, we kind of stop them for a second and let them answer, and give them one of those. But there's different ways to kind of prepare athletes through it. There's a question that came in. This is for you specifically in your recruiting process. So I know you mentioned this early on. Maybe you didn't catch it, but like, when you were getting recruited, right? Like, did you have a profile similar to SportsRecruits? And the second question is, how did you know that that a school you had never heard of was the right fit for you?
Well, I was being recruited in 1999 and 2000. So for all intents and purposes, the internet did not exist. So there would be no profile. But what is really funny, and hat tip to my dad on this, I had and again, maybe this is just set in a seed for me to start this business a handful of years later. But I remember I went to Peak 200 as a camp at Springfield, and I had a little index card with all the pertinent information about me. my SAT scores, my GPA. At this point, recruiting was happening a lot later. So would have been the summer before my senior year. And they had a little college, almost like college night at the event with each coach having a different table. And so I kind of went around and gave each coach a VHS tape and my little note card. And then randomly I ended up getting a call from Coach Reba, a handful of weeks later, who saw me play a little bit and got the tape. And so that's how that kind of came together. But again, I like to think I still made it easy for Coach Reba because I gave him a VHS tape and I gave him all my grades and everything. So he didn't have to figure out whether I could get into the school because he could see it on my my little note card that I gave him. But how did I end up at a school I never heard of? So, I was really interested in kind of an SGACs. So I went on a visit to Amherst. I went on a visit to Williams. Admittedly, I didn't do enough research myself to realize that Wesleyan and a bunch of other great schools are in the NESCAC as well. I just knew Williams and Amherst because that's where a lot of kids from my high school went. And so I was going down the kind of road with those schools. And I had ran into Coach Reba at this event and given him my little note card and my VHS tape. And he said, hey, again, I saw you play a little bit. I saw your tape. I talked to your coach. You don't want to come up for a visit. And I went in and sat down with my guidance counselor at school. And I said, hey, this school Wesleyan reached out to me. What's going on there? And he spun me around in my chair and they had the kind of top, whatever liberal arts schools listed there. And sure enough, you had Amherst and Williams a few spots above Wesleyan, but it was right there in the mix. And he said, yeah, I mean, if you're interested in Amherst and Williams, Wesleyan should be on your mix, right in the mix for you. So I went on my visit and I was a goalie and there was a goalie graduating. And so set myself up for a competition to go into that school. And it worked out great. But kind of if I could roll the tape back, I would have done a little more research because there are other schools that are Division III academically selective schools like Swarthmore or Haverford that weren't on my list just because I was kind of ignorant to their existence. And so that's kind of the personal story I like to use is that I lucked out. I got lucky. But there were also a few 100,000 less. I don't even know how many our kids are playing lacrosse now, but there were a hell of a lot less kids playing in 1999 than there are today. So I don't think that kind of luck happens as often as it did back then.
Interesting.
All right, great. So kind of in conclusion here, I know this is kind of a little bit of a loaded question, but we always like to end with like maybe one piece of advice for a player that is going through the recruiting process to kind of sum up a lot of great things that you've already given us because you've given us a lot of advice. But what would maybe that one thing if they do get out of this this interview and this conversation, like what would it be for a lacrosse recruit?
I'll say for the player and parent, when you're in the thick of it, try to hit pause and again just think rationally for a second. So if school A isn't working out like you think you want it to be, you want to really go to school A. It's not really going as well as you wish it would be. The coach isn't giving you as much love as you thought he or she would. Put pause, step back. Again, are there schools out there that are like school A that you haven't been communicating with? And just try to make sure you bring that kind of rational thought to the process throughout it, not just at the start and not just at the end, but when you're in the middle, that's like kind of, and you guys know this from working with so many athletes, the middle is kind of messy, right? You've communicated with, 25, 30 schools, you got a lot of coals in the fire. And sometimes it feels like this process isn't fair. This process isn't rational. It should be working this way, but it's not. Step back sometimes and just realize that you're putting in the work, you're being proactive, you're doing the right things. And stick with it and it should work out. And don't drive yourself too crazy in the middle of it because it's an exciting time. I'll trade spots and go to your college if you want to. You're going to end up in a great place and just kind of, it is emotional and it's really easy for me to say being on the other side of it, but try to kind of step back and appreciate it every once in a while because you're going through a kind of exciting period of your life and you're about to enter a really exciting period of your life. So kind of take it easy on yourself.
Matt, do you know about the College Road Tour my dad and I do every February break?
Where do you go to? This sounds like a fun tour.
It is. It's a good time. We visit 8 to 10 schools over the course of 4 days and 3 nights. We pick different regions around the country. We schedule meetings with both the men's staff, the women's staff. We watch games. We cover practices. Last year we took Frank, who produces the show alongside Cliff, and we actually live stream our BYG show in the stadium at Dickinson. And it was overlooking the entire brand new stadium setup they had there, which was sick. But anyway, next week is our tour, so we're visiting. I think what do we have? 8 schools or 9 schools?
Yeah, we're doing.
Take us through the tour real quick.
Yeah, so we go over the ferry at Orient Point, and we go to the Coast Guard Academy. We go to Connecticut College, then we head up a little north to Worcester, Mass, and we go to Clark University and Holy Cross. We'll meet with all the men's and women's coaches and watch. I think we're going to watch Holy Cross UMass Lowell on Tuesday night. And then the next day we go to UMass and we do Amherst, and then we go to Fairfield.
So we'll be meeting, like we said, with the men's and women's staffs for all those schools. Any question that you personally want to ask any of the coaches along those schools that you might know, and we'll make sure to deliver that message, what would it be?
Any question? I always like to ask these coaches kind of if they had a kid going through the recruiting process right now, what would they want that kid to know? Not what they know, but if they had a kid going through it. Because, again, Coach Reba had a son go through it. He's at Loyola, and it was interesting. Kind of Chris and I got to kind of help him out and answer some questions about it, because it's interesting to always hear when you're on one side of the table as the coach, and then your son's on the other side of the table going through it. Everything is flipped. What's up is down, what's left is right. And so I always find it interesting to say, well, hey, if let's just say you had a kid going through it and you weren't allowed to be involved, and you had to tell your son or daughter one thing that was going to guide them through the process, what might that one thing be? And I ask coaches that whenever I get a chance to. And you always get really kind of interesting. Generally, you get, wow, that's a really good question. And they know how stressful the process is being on this side of the table. And sometimes they'll say, oh, well, I only have young kids, so I'm gonna sidestep that question. But I always like to hear kind of, again, they're on this, this side of the table, and what might they say to their son or daughter if they were about to kind of enter high school and go through? What will be the one piece of advice they would impart on that student athlete?
All right, that's great. We'll reserve that we'll try to get that on each and every coach. We'll record it. We'll share it. And before we close with our show and get another quick word from our sponsor, Epic. Matt, we just want to thank you for coming on and joining us on BYG. This will not be the last time that we see you on BYG. For those of you who don't know, SportsRecruits is going to be sharing essentially advice for you. If you have a son or daughter going through the recruiting process, they're going to be sharing data-driven knowledge, data-driven results. They're going to be sharing findings that they accumulate and discuss in their SportsRecruits HQ based on all the people that use their platform and all the players that they essentially help through the process. So every week on BYG, we're going to be giving you guys one little nugget of information that can hopefully help you through the process. And I think by us doing that, we're educating the audience of our Beyond the Game show, and it also will give you an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the great resources that are out there, like SportsRecruits, who we use personally because we believe in the product with our FLG program. But it's just to let you know that the process doesn't have to be so scary and overwhelming and confusing. It can be a rational, realistic, enjoyable if you let it process as well. So again, Matt, thank you, and again, we'll see you again soon.
Thanks for the support.
it.